Welcome to Tuesdays for Nurture. I am Reverend Dr. Chris Davies, and I'm here to usher you into a conversation that I am sure will continue to transform you and how you hold your view of the world. Tuesdays for Nurture is a Tuesday webinar series where we faithfully focus on education for all the people of God. Topics from faith-filled politics to interviews of to key leaders to how-tos in congregational life will all be featured. And each webinar will include clear suggestions on what you can do to change the church, the world, and all of that towards the world that God imagines for us all. I want to introduce Reverend Traci Blackmon, who will host today's webinar. And as she comes in, I am so excited to welcome all of you here.
Thank you so much, Chris, and good afternoon, everyone. I am excited to be with you today to have a conversation with someone I consider a sister and a friend, Valarie Kaur. Valarie Kaur is a Sikh activist. She's a filmmaker. She's an author, of course. She's a civil rights lawyer. She's an ally. She is an accomplice. She's a parent. She's a mom, and just an overall incredible human being. And I'm so delighted that she had time in her schedule to share with us today. We spend so much of our time these days talking about what we need to dismantle, what we need to deconstruct, what we need to do away with. I'm glad to spend this hour with you and with Valerie talking about what we can build. Her ethos for love and for life is refreshing and gives me new wind. And I'm excited that she'll be able to share some of that with you. As a way of further introduction to her, I want you to meet Valerie the way that I met Valerie. So we're going to play a clip from a gathering that we shared space together for the first time, attached to the Moral Mondays movement. It describes her better than any words that I could ever say.
I'm having some technical difficulties, which is embarrassing, but in the same boat as so many of you as you are doing your best. So forgive me while I pull this up. There we are.
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ. On Christmas Eve, 103 years ago, my grandfather waited in a dark and dank cell. He sailed by steamship across the Pacific Ocean from India to America, leaving behind colonial rule. But when he landed on American shores, immigration officials saw his dark skin, his tall turban worn as part of his Sikh faith, and saw him not as a brother, but as foreign, as suspect, threw him behind bars where he languished for months. Until a single man, a white man, a lawyer named Henry Marshall, filed a writ of habeas corpus that released him Christmas Eve, 1913. My grandfather, Kehar Singh, became a farmer, free to practice the heart of his Sikh faith, love and oneness. And so when his Japanese American neighbors were rounded up and taken to their own detention camps in the deserts of America, he went out to see them when no one else would. He looked after their farms until they returned home. He refused to stand down.
That's right.
In the aftermath of September 11, when hate violence exploded in these United States and a man that I called uncle was murdered. I tried to stand up. I became a lawyer like the man who freed my grandfather, and I joined a generation of activists fighting detentions and deportation, surveillance and special registration, hate crimes and racial profiling. And after 15 years, with every film, with every lawsuit, with every campaign, I thought we were making the nation safer for the next generation. And then my son was born. On Christmas Eve, I watched him ceremoniously put the milk and cookies by the fire for Santa Claus. And after he went to sleep, I then drank the milk and ate the cookies. I wanted him to wake up and see them gone in the morning. I wanted him to believe in a world that was magical. But I am leaving my son a world that is more dangerous than the one that I was given. Because we are raising a brown boy in America. A brown boy who may someday wear a turban as part of his faith. And in America today, as we enter an era of enormous rage, as white nationalists hail this moment as their great awakening, as hate acts against Sikhs and our Muslim brothers and sisters are at an all-time high, I know that there will be moments, whether on the streets or in the schoolyard, where my son will be seen as foreign, as suspect, as a terrorist. Just as Black bodies are still seen as criminal. Brown bodies are still seen as illegal. Trans bodies are still seen as immoral. Indigenous bodies are still seen as savage. The bodies of women and girls seen as someone else's property. And when we see these bodies not as brothers and sisters, then it becomes easier to bully them, to rape them, to allow policies that neglect them, that incarcerate them, that kill them. Yes, Rabbi. Yeah. The future is dark. On this New Year's Eve, this watch night, I close my eyes and I see the darkness of my grandfather's cell. And I can feel the spirit of ever-rising optimism in the Sikh tradition, Chardi Kala, within him. And so the mother in me asks, what if? What if this darkness is not the darkness of the tomb, but the darkness of the womb? Woo. What if our America... that is waiting to be born? What if the story of America is one long labor? What if all of our grandfathers or grandmothers are standing behind us now, those who survived occupation and genocide, slavery and Jim Crow, detentions and political assault? What if they're whispering in our ear today, tonight, you are brave? What if this is our nation's great transition?
Welcome, Valerie.
Thank you, my sister. What a night to meet.
What a night. And that piece takes me right back there, and I still have chills.
You know, I haven't seen it in a long time. in its entirety. And so I'm feeling those chills with you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was an important moment, and you spoke into an atmosphere that was fraught with fear, fraught with confusion, fraught with what's next, and gave us a reframing that was filled with hope. And that reframing is still needed today. I happen to know, because we're friends and you sent me a copy, that you have written this unbelievable book of hope, See No Stranger. And that's why I invited you on to talk. But I want you to share a little bit about your journey and how you got to this place of resistant hope, holy hope, in the face of all that we have faced in America.
Well, I have to tell you, my sister, that shortly after I gave that watch night address,
Mhm.
I received thousands of messages from people I didn't know who said, okay, I'm in, but how? How do I breathe? How do I push? How do we labor for justice when the labor feels endless?
Mhm.
That watch night address I gave just a few weeks before this president took power on inauguration day. And do you remember that first week already we were fighting Muslim bans and punishments of sanctuary cities? And I was, I'm a lawyer, I'm an activist, I'm a filmmaker, I'm an organizer. And so I was opening up my toolkit and I was pulling out all of the tools, trying to resist, trying to show up. And I was falling apart. I needed to answer that question of how. If the midwife says to breathe and push, how? Because I want it to last.
Yeah.
For myself and for my son. And so I was given a gift that few women who are mothers and activists are ever given, Traci. I was given enough of a book advance to take time off and find a room of my own and just think and write and write and write. And I moved my family, I actually physically left the country for a year. I was in the rainforest with my family in Central America. And the rainforest felt like a womb. Like it was warm and it was wet and it was safe and it was generative. And here I was, an activist. I've been an activist since 9/11, since Bilbir Uncle was killed after 9/11. And in all of these years, I had only pushed. I had not taken that deep breath. I didn't know how to sustain the kind of rhythm that's required to stay in labors for justice over the course of a lifetime until I was in the rainforest.
Mhm.
And I spent each afternoon at my desk pouring through the stories of my life. I took all of my journals, everything that I had written since I was 7 years old. I kept a journal since I was 7. So I was reading my life as a script. And I was reading through sick stories and sick histories. I was reading social movements of the past, looking for patterns.
Mhm.
And I began to see patterns that I began to call revolutionary love. And I began writing this book, See No Stranger, a memoir and manifesto of revolutionary love. And I wrote this book, Traci, for my own survival. And I had no idea that it would be coming out into the world at a time when this question, is this the darkness of the tomb or the darkness of the womb, would be more urgent than ever.
That's powerful. And what I encountered in that book, Valerie, were stories that point to moments in life when transformation happened and when they're possible. And what I want to lift up about that is that this transformation didn't necessarily happen in large masses, but happened in intimate conversation. I'm very familiar with that. And I want to talk a little bit about that because I see in our country now that in so many ways, as Ruby Sales would say to either one of us, we have diminished humanity by taking us to the least common denominator, which is the color of our skin, or maybe the address of our home, or maybe the amount of money in our bank account. And we've given up so much of what it means to be humanity by focusing on these differences.
Mm.
So in this world of we, where we have to push, where we have to grieve together, could you talk a little bit about the stories that provide illumination in See No Stranger as a way of connecting us? I have my favorite, but I want to hear your take on some of the stories.
Oh, I want to hear your favorite because I was just searching my mind. I'm like, which story should I offer?
There's a story about you having a close relationship with one of your classmates, and your classmate never, well, I won't say never, but until this encounter, perhaps had not seen you fully, right? Do you know the story I'm talking about? Of course you do, right? And you began to share how painful it was. This person was strong in their faith. They were Christian. I'm Christian, and you and I have had conversations about how most of the time when Christians say we're interfaith, what we mean is we have guests, right? And so opening up and illuminating for this person what it means to see another fully, and to see them and honor who they are without any need to change them, which is really the beginning of deep listening. Someone, John White in our chat, is saying he has a favorite story too. So tell us whatever it is, whatever story. You can take that one or another story.
I remember I was 12 years old, 13 years old, sitting in the library with my best friend Lisa,
Mm-hmm.
when we were in our own bubble, like two girls giggling, working on our projects together. And she looked up at me and had that faraway look in her eyes and said, "Oh, Valerie, I just can't wait until Judgment Day." And I said, "Oh, why?" She said, "Oh, it'll just be us and everybody else will be gone." I said, "Gone? Where?" And she said, "Down there." And it was that moment when I realized that my best friend thought I was going to hell. She just didn't know it yet. And I had to be the one to break it to her. And so I told her, "Lisa, I'm not Christian." And I remember the blood just drained from her face. And she said, "Well, I thought that Sikhism was a sect of Christianity." I mean, this was our world. We lived in a small, predominantly white Christian farming town in the Central Valley of California. And it was our world. So how could her best friend not be Christian? I was a problem that she couldn't solve, that I couldn't solve. And as much as she tried to convert me to Christianity, to get me to say the words to make everything right again, I couldn't, because I knew that I couldn't leave my family behind. That my grandfather, who was my pillar of wisdom, I knew for sure that he wasn't going to hell. So that meant that was my one little thing to hold fast to, and to tell Lisa, there's got to be a way. There's got to be a way to be beloved on this earth, even if we follow different paths. But it was so painful, Traci. It was so painful. And that encounter was followed by teachers who tried to convert me. There's so many stories I didn't include in the book. There was just so many encounters. And in exorcism, I remember at one point a woman entered our house and put her hand on my chest and was rocking me back and forth and trying to banish the devil from my mind, saying that anytime that I believed that there were many paths to God, that was the devil speaking to me. I thought I lost my best friend.
Wow.
And it wasn't until so many years later, actually 15 years later, that one day I would receive a Facebook notification. 15 years after I thought our friendship was over, Lisa would reach out with an apology. She would still be Christian and I would still be sick, but she would have long abandoned the particular theology that had tried to sever us from one another. She had gone on her own journey, encountered new ideas, knocked on doors that opened her to new wonders, and had eventually come back to our friendship. In the end, we learned that love was the way, the truth, and the life.
Revolutionary love. And I would suggest that all of our lives are filled with such stories. I'd shared a story with you of a close friend of mine who's a rabbi, who just sitting together in her study one day, she said to me, I made a reference to scripture and I said Old Testament. And she just said to me, almost as a throwaway, when you say Old Testament, you make me think that you believe my journey is over. Just those words reframed my thought process, reframed my thinking. And I think you're onto something, Valerie, because this human touch of listening to one another and sharing our stories may be the greatest hope we have for this moment. Can you talk a little bit about what you see as moments and glimmers of hope for this moment?
Let me say first that I believe that all of us who are born into dominant positions, whether we're born into white skin or born into Christian communities, we have been given scripts about who we are and how we ought to be that sever us from our own deeper knowing and our own deeper longing for that touch. Lisa had inherited a theology that commanded her to see me as inferior, as unsaved, as going to hell. And that conflicted with her own deepest longing to love her best friend. She could not love me and still believe that I was going to hell. And so we had lost our friendship until she could begin to give up on the script that she had been given. Mm-hmm. And I think about Christian supremacy and I think about white supremacy. Mm-hmm. How many white people have been given a script that it's okay to move in a world that is designed to give you benefits economically, socially, and politically, and turn a blind eye to how the Black people and people of color in your life are gasping for breath, either from a deadly virus or from state violence or from an officer's knee on their neck. Mm-hmm. To release ourselves of the scripts we have been given, that requires bravery. That requires courage. That requires an awakening. And I feel like that's the moment we're in. Traci, you're asking me, like, when have I seen these moments? I mean, we are in the midst of a revolutionary moment that I never thought I would see in my lifetime. When we're seeing white people standing in front of Black people, kneeling in the street in front of an army of police officers. Yeah. I mean, it feels like 1968. It feels like 1992. But these images of white people, non-Black people of color, flooding the streets together, grieving together, raging together, fighting together, that we have never seen. Mm-hmm. And so I think about the intimate moments that had to happen for those white people willing to put their bodies and their lives at risk for the Black people behind them in order to get them to that moment of courage. Mm-hmm. I think about all of the invisible ways that we have to break each other open and long to hold fast to each other, wake each other up, in order to take on systems of injustice, because it really is about changing institutions of power in this country. And some people say, no, it's all about the intimate touch. And some people say, no, it's all about resisting the institutions. And I say, no, you need both. You need both. We need to wonder with each other, grieve with each other in order to fight and reimagine the country as we know it. And all of us may have different roles at different times.
So how do we break ourselves away from these scripts? Because we all have them, right? They're not just racial scripts, they're gender scripts, they're heteronormative scripts, they're classist scripts, they're ageist scripts. How do we give ourselves permission to break away from these scripts that we've been given? And I would suggest, Valerie, that in this moment, not only are we given scripts, but they are played over and over and over again. And they're amplified by media. They're rehearsed for us on social networks. How do we break loose of that?
Discomfort is the beginning of transformation. Mm-hmm. We live in a culture that teaches us to be afraid of pain. And so we numb our pain with alcohol or with addiction or with our social media feeds. But to have the courage to sit in our discomfort, to reckon with shame, to reckon with guilt. And people are telling me, oh, but how do I sit with my shame? I know it's not useful to be ashamed. This is what a lot of white people are telling me right now. So they're ashamed of their shame. And I say, it's okay to inhabit whatever emotion arises as you're waking up. The key is not to get stuck in it, to move through it, and to find people who will help you breathe and push through the labor of becoming something new on the other side of it. And I believe you're right. All of us have that work ahead of us. And it looks different for all of us, right? For so many Black people right now who have been grieving and raging, I want to say your role right now is to breathe, to put breath in your body before the next push, because the labor for justice has fallen on your backs for so many centuries in this country. And I want to tell you for the first time that you are not alone. You don't carry the labor alone. So breathe, love yourself well. And for white people who are waking up, I want to invite white people to think about not becoming allies, but becoming what our Indigenous leaders are calling us to be, becoming accomplices, conspiring with people to break chains of oppression. And each of us has a role in that labor. So I know a lot of people are like, well, I'm going to be marching the streets, I'm going to be holding the signs, and I'm going to look for the lawmakers out there to change policing, to change public safety, to change criminal justice. And that's right. But then you go back into your families, you go back into your homes, you go back into your houses of worship and your industries and your workplaces. There is no institution on the face of this country that does not need you right now to transition it. And I think about the church. And I think about the work that you do, Traci, and the work that so many in the UCC are doing right now, when we need you more than ever to reimagine what the church might look like and the role of the church to birthing an anti-racist society.
And that's the goal, right? That's the goal. I get kind of caught up sometimes, Valerie, when we talk about systems, because I 100% agree with you. But I also need people to know that we are the system, right? that we are a part of that system, that the system is not this inanimate object out here that gets changed in some miraculous way, but that we are the system, that the people that are in our government offices, the people who are our legislators, most of them are sitting in some place of faith, at least occasionally. What theological teachings are we promoting? What messages of love and grace are we promoting? How do we move from this war stance of winning against instead of a redemptive stance of winning for? And that's what I think See No Stranger is all about. That's what it is for me, right? And so I want to hear from you how you've made this shift. Because activism work, as necessary as it is, sometimes puts us in a stance of winning instead of hearing, instead of listening, instead of creating space for grace. You have made that shift. And I know that's a lot to ask for on a webinar, but I want you guys to buy the book. I do want you to buy the book. But I want you to hear why it's so important in this moment in time. In many ways, I am glad that you are touring this way versus the traditional way, because the opportunity to engage with you around what went into this book is so critical.
I feel moved to read you a passage from chapter 6, Reimagine. The greatest social reformers in history did not only resist oppressors, they held up a vision of what the world ought to be. Nanak sang it, Muhammad led it, Jesus taught it, Buddha envisioned it, King dreamt it, Dorothy Day labored for it, Mandela lived it, Gandhi died for it, Grace Lee Boggs, may we be like her, Traci. Grace Lee Boggs fought for it for 7 decades. They called for us not only to unseat bad actors, but to reimagine the institutions of power that ordered the world. Any social harm can be traced to institutions that produce it, authorize it, or otherwise profit from it. To undo the injustice, we have to imagine new institutions and step in to lead them. what does that take to expand our own imagination of what is possible? That's what you're calling me to focus on, Traci, that this out here, the social and political transformation that we need, cannot happen unless a spiritual and cultural transformation is happening in here.
Absolutely.
And I believe that it begins with choice to see no stranger. When I was a little girl, my grandfather would scoop me up in his lap and tell me stories of the Sikh faith. And the origin story was always my favorite. It was the story of Guru Nanak, the founder of the Sikh faith. He had disappeared by a river for 3 days, so distraught by the violence around him. And he emerged on the 3rd day with a vision of oneness, Ik Omkar, the oneness of humanity, the oneness of the world. And he taught that we could look upon the face of anyone and say, you are a part of me I do not yet know. You, Traci, are a part of me I do not yet know. Nako beri nahi begana. Nako beri nahi begana. I see no enemy. I see no stranger. And Papaji used to say, love, this kind of love is dangerous business. Because if I see you as my sister, if I see George Floyd as my brother, Breonna Taylor as my sister, Nina Pop, Tony McDade, Rayshard Browns as my siblings, if I see you, then I must be willing to let your grief into my heart. Tamir Rice, my son, right?
Yes, yes.
If it is my son who is killed in the park, then I must be willing to fight for you as if you were my own flesh and blood. And that's why the model in the Sikh faith was the Sant Sipahi, the sage warrior or the warrior sage. The warrior fights, the sage loves. It was a path of revolutionary love. I think that kind of love is what is fueling our revolutionary moment right now. And I want to invite people to stay in the labor. And the only way, if we're running on vitriol or just pure resistance, we will burn out, we will opt out, we will not last, we'll start to mirror the very thing that we're fighting. Yeah. But if we're grounding our lives and our activism in love, loving others, loving opponents, loving ourselves, then we will last. And your faith has so many stories of what revolutionary love looks like. And if we can pull from our stories and scriptures and songs and offer them for a new generation, then maybe this is our great transition as a country.
So this that you just named, Valerie, is how I see the transition from ally to accomplice. You know, allyship is, I'm sorry that happens to you. Accomplice is, because it's happening to you, it's happening to me, right? And it's through those stories and seeing that connection that you named so beautifully, that I'm a part of you that you have not yet met, that you're a part of me that I have not yet met, makes us accomplices on this journey. Because then I recognize that I am not fighting for your liberation. We are fighting together for our liberation. And it matters. It matters. That's very helpful. So before we get to breath and before we get to push, we first have to have a seed that's growing. Where might we begin this journey?
I developed a really simple practice for myself because it's all about practice, right? I feel like a lot of people are like, okay, I'm ready to be anti-racist and it's all up here. Like, what? I need to say the right things and show up in the right ways and it's all up here, right? Yeah. But if you are practicing revolutionary love in your life, if you are seeing your life as a series of experiments in revolutionary love, then there is no way to be anything other than anti-racist. I think what is called for is an orientation to life that is personal and political, a way of moving through the world. And I'm inviting people into imagining love as a way to move through the world. And so it can begin really small and really simple, and it becomes really big. So the simple practice I developed for myself some years ago was just walking down the street And it's more difficult now with masks, but I would I would look, and maybe, cognitively, like a good exercise to like see every face and say uncle, aunt, daughter, son, grandmother, grandfather, just to begin to practice to undo all the ways that we have been trained to see each other.
Yes, yes. Are you familiar with Gregory Ellison?
No, I'm not.
You're not. Gregory Ellison is a PhD at Candler, and he's done some work around what he calls fearless dialogue. And the first time I was in a session with him, I was in a session with a table full of leaders, and you know how that goes, right? And he asked us all to identify ourselves, but we could not identify ourselves by what we do, right? It seems like it would be simple, but it really isn't, because of how we're trained to think, right? He said, I want you to identify yourself by what gifts you bring into this room today. And you all do, right? And so when you say to me, going down the street and saying, uncle, sister, brother, mother, daughter, son, it reminds us of the connection instead of the divisions. I love that. I love that. I love that.
And I would offer that it's even more radical than love thy neighbor as yourself. I feel like love your neighbor as yourself should be like the floor. But what I'm proposing is like, when I say you are a part of me, I do not yet know, it is an orientation of wonder that I need to figure out how to love you the way that you need to be loved, and you need to be seen, and you need to be heard. And I know this as a Sikh because, we have 5 articles of faith. Keeping our kesh, long uncut hair, is one of those articles of faith. And so many of our men and some women wear that long hair in a turban. And the turban is supposed to be a crown. It's supposed to make us so that we cannot hide, so that you could see us in a crowd and say, oh, there's a Sikh, he will feed me, or she will nurse me, or she will put clothes on my back, or she will fight for me when I'm in need. Like this turban, this long hair was meant to be seen as a sign of love and justice, that we would love you and that we would defend you and that we would serve you. And so how ironic, of course, that these same articles have marked us in this country as terrorists. But if people could orient to us with a sense of wonder, you are a part of me I do not yet know. Hear our stories, change, retrain how they see us, then that is the beginning of true belonging in this country.
Indeed. And pushing that particular Christian text even further is our malformation of neighbor, right? So who is our neighbor? Which there are certain Christian texts that certainly go into our neighbor is beyond the people that we're comfortable with and beyond the people that we know. But when we think of neighbor, we contextualize it in a way that brings us comfort. This love you're talking about, as you said earlier, is uncomfortable.
Yes.
It's revolutionary love.
It risks you being changed by drawing close to another.
Yes, yes. And even to sit long enough to understand the meaning behind the turban, the meaning around the symbolic nature of the turban, which is maybe not one way that we've ever thought about it, right? I remember watching this cartoon once, and a Muslim woman was in the cartoon, and she was dressed not just with the head covering, but with the all black where you could just only see the eyes, right? And there were thoughts from an American woman who was in a bikini towards this woman saying, I would never be oppressed that way. And the Muslim woman's thought bubble was looking at the American woman in the bikini, right? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I would never be oppressed that way, right? So it's getting out of this place of thinking that what we do and what we have embraced is the only way to do something. It's the only way to love. It's the only way to serve. And certainly your book helps us do that, but really your witness, your public witness in life helps us do that as well. Yeah.
Thank you, sister.
So since that encounter in, I can't even remember what church we were in, Valerie. Do you remember? I think we were in DC.
We were in DC.
Yeah, I can't remember whose pulpit that was. But since that time, in that story, you had one child, a son, and now you have two.
They're downstairs right now with my husband. Hopefully they're not going to burst through the door any minute. Actually, no, it's baby's nap time, so she's good.
Oh, someone, Ebony Grissom is listening. She says we were in Metropolitan A&E, and she probably was there with us. Thank you, Ebony.
Thank you, Ebony.
What world do you want to leave for your children?
Oh, Traci. I wrote the chapters in this book while I was pregnant with my daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And when I said I wrote this book as an act of survival for myself after I got pregnant, it was like an act of survival for her. I was so sick in my pregnancy. I was in a wheelchair for half the time. I was in the ER. I was throwing up every hour. I had hyperemesis, and I knew that I was going to survive up here, but part of me was really worried that I wouldn't. Mm-hmm. And so I wrote this book so that she would have the greatest inheritance that I could give her if I didn't make it. And I sat at this desk, and when you asked me what hope do you have for your children, I'm just going to read to you some of the last words in this book because it was to her, and now I want to say it's to you. So I wrote these words sitting at this writing desk, and I stood up and immediately went into active labor, and she was born 4 hours later. So
wow.
The book into the world at the same time. So this is what I wrote to her. You are beloved, just as you are. You are worthy of this earth and its seas and skies and the gifts it has to offer, just as you are. And the earth will receive all the gifts you give it, as long as the gifts that you give are given in joy. Let joy in every day, my love, every day. Let joy be your lifeblood. Her name is Ananda, and in Sanskrit, her name means joy. And this is why this was my hope for her. I believe that joy is possible even amid great labors, the labor of dying, the labor of birthing, and the labors between. We cannot force it, but when we create moments to breathe between labor pains and surrender our senses to the present moment, notice the colors and light and feeling of being alive here together, joy comes more easily. It is a felt sense in our bodies, in the face of horrors visited upon our world daily, in the struggle to protect our loved ones. Choosing to let in joy is a revolutionary act. Joy returns us to everything good and beautiful and worth fighting for. It gives us energy for the long labor. Letting in joy, therefore, is the 10th practice of revolutionary love, the core practice that sustains all others. It makes the labor an end in itself. I believe laboring in joy is the meaning of life.
Ashe. And you list in the book practices of revolutionary love. I don't want you to list them all here because I want people to buy the book. But they're very helpful practices. And I want you to know that the photo you sent me of those two adorable children laughing and enjoying life is on my refrigerator so that I can have some joy and I can have some love every day. Kent Salati, you know Kent, you were in Southern New England conference just a little while ago. He has a question. I think we've answered it, but I'll ask it anyway. Our ancestral legacy to bestow on our children's children needs our mindfulness. What do you want your grandchildren to say about your legacy? These people did what? about our legacy, not just you.
Mm.
These people did what?
I want to say thank you, Kent. Being with you all at the Southern New England Conference was one of the last events I did before the pandemic, and I can still feel the energy and warmth of your community and how you embraced me with so much love. Thank you. And I'll just read to you the very last line of the book. We will be someone's ancestors one day. If we do this right, they will inherit not our fear, but bravery born of joy.
Yes. I say.
I believe, Traci, that if there is, neuroscientists tell us that there is such a thing as intergenerational trauma, that the trauma of my ancestors, the partition of India in 1947, the pogroms against Sikhs in 1984, that lives in my bodies. And so when I jump at loud noises at night, and my husband doesn't, he doesn't share quite the same history as I do, then I know that that's because that trauma lives in my blood.
Mm-hmm.
If that is the case, then I think that there is also such a thing as intergenerational resilience and intergenerational bravery. And so I find myself calling upon my grandfather's memory a lot these days. He survived, after he arrived in California, the story that I told in the speech, he survived the 1918 Spanish flu and decades of racist laws until he could have a home and farm on his own where I could be born and I could raise and live my life. And I think about his audacity and his bravery. And I know now, I mean, I just thought like, okay, my grandfather sacrificed so that I could be free and it'll get better for my children. I thought about history as a single line of linear progress, right? And that idea of history is just evaporated now. I think of the story of America as one long labor. And progress and birthing labor, it is cyclical, not linear, it's cyclical. So this moment, 2020, it feels like 68, it feels like 92, but every turn through the cycle has opened up a little bit more space for equality and justice than there was before. Here's the thing. I don't know how many more turns through the cycle it's going to take. I know that every single turn gets us closer to the thing that is wanting to be born, but only if enough of us are breathing and pushing. And so I want to do my part on this time when we are on this earth together to be breathing and pushing for the America that I dream. And it could be that my children will have to find their moment where they are breathing and pushing, but at least we will be giving them tools of how to reclaim Dr. King's call to love for a new generation. And that's what these practices are for. Oh, my love, this is how you wonder. This is how you grieve. This is how you rage. This is how you fight. This is how you let enjoy in the long labor.
Those are the words of Coretta Scott King, who says every generation must fight their own battles. But as people of faith, of multiple faiths, I believe that it is our call to push and to breathe and to move towards this place that you have written about so eloquently, but that I hope we all envision. A place that's not fueled by hatred, not anyone else's hatred, and not our hatred, but one that is indeed fueled by love. And that, my sister, is revolutionary. I'm going to invite Chris back in with us. I don't know if we have questions, Chris. I couldn't go fast enough to read all of the chats. So are there questions waiting?
There are. First, a question from Susan Dion about how do we deal with this "you are a part of me that I do not yet know" approach with people who are filled with hate and prejudice and people who are not open?
Yeah. How do you love your opponents? And I want to say, my love, that if you can think of an opponent right now and you are flushed with rage, or you're flushed with trauma, you're flushed with pain, now is not the time to wonder about them. When a police officer is pressing his knee on our neck, it's not our moment, it's not our role to look up and wonder about him, to try to love him. You know what our revolutionary act is? To let others do that labor. I can't sit with Trump supporters right now. At this moment, I can't sit with white supremacists, but Traci and I know Sister Simone Campbell, Catholic nun who goes on listening tours around the country and sits with the people that I can't. And she listens to them, and beneath the sound bites and the slogans, she can hear their stories and she can hear their pain. So this is what I've discovered. Those police officers, those prison guards, those white supremacists, there are no such thing as monsters in this world. There are only human beings who are wounded, who are cut off from their own capacity to love. And if we leave them alone, then they just become more radicalized and more violent and more dangerous. But if some of us, if white accomplices can do that work of healing, of tending to their wounds, that's how we're going to transition this country. So I think that revolutionary love is about role literacy. Like, what is your role in this moment? All of us have a different role.
Ashe. Maybe I'll invite Simone to come on. That would be kind of cool. I'm sure she would do that as well. Something else that helps me in this moment, Valerie, and I'm sure in your text, in your readings, that you could find the same. But in my Christian readings, I always remind myself, I never let humans be completely heroic.
Yes.
Understanding of text, right?
Yes.
So I would suggest that we don't just live with the opponent out there, but if we're honest, we live with the opponents in here. Yes. And it may not be for me around race because I wear Black skin. And so I get what that means very well. But it was a journey for me to get where I needed to be around same gender loving people. I wasn't raised in an environment that was affirming of what God affirms. And so it's been a journey for me, right? And I've been delivered and I've been transformed by those same kind of relationships that you're talking about, and that continue to push me. My faith, Christianity, is a privilege in this country. And we don't like to think of it that way. We'll talk about the persecution of Christians, but you know what? Every day that matters to me in my faith is a holiday, right? You know what I'm saying? Just basic things like that. And so recognizing that even inside of ourselves, we wrestle.
Yes.
And be willing to wrestle.
Yes.
Be willing to wrestle, even inside of ourselves. If we can't do that courage internally, we will never do it externally. Yeah. Sorry, Chris. She touched my heart with that.
No, we when we named this book See No Stranger, the idea was that how do we not be strangers to ourselves?
Yes. Yes.
The audacity and the courage to reckon and sit with all the parts of our own selves.
Yes.
Parts we are ashamed of, the parts that we have to wrestle with, the parts that we have to grow, the parts that are, I call, you'll see in the last chapter of the book, I call one part of myself the little critic. The part of me that is like, you're not good enough, you're not strong enough, you're not smart enough. And I have to quiet the little critic and learn to love the little critic, to soothe the little critic, so that the wise woman in me can rise in me and say, oh no, you are enough. And this is how we're going to grow next. This is how we're going to push next. This is what it means for you to practice love next. And I think this world is run by voices that are dominated by their little critics. And that if all the rest of us can summon our deepest wisdom each day, it's not just to center ourselves, but it's how we will transition the country.
Susan says in the chat, being able to come clean about our own woundedness does not have to be done alone. Help and support is available, and absolutely yes to that. But you know, this way that we're talking about and thinking is also what allows us to do this work in our families and with those that we love the most. We have to be able to see not just the evil, but the capacity for good. We have to. We
And
have
the capacity to change.
the capacity to change. And I guess I'm calling that the capacity for good, right? And no, I'm not going to see it if I'm on the protest line in the middle of, you're right about that. I'm not going to see it in that moment, right? But I have to remind myself that grace is also a part of revolutionary love.
15 years after Bilbir Uncle was murdered, his brother Rana and I decided to do something that we never thought we would be able to do. We called Bilbir Uncle's murderer in prison.
Wow.
And at first, I thought this was a mistake because Frank Roque was saying, yeah, I'm sorry for what happened to your uncle, but I'm sorry for all the thousands who were killed on 9/11. I started to feel angry. And that was my role, to try to be a guardian for his brother, Rana.
Mm-hmm.
But Rana, because I was creating this protective mother love strength around him, he could keep wondering about Frank. He could listen and hear what I couldn't hear. He said, Frank, this is the first time I've heard you say you were sorry. And Frank said, yeah, yes, I am sorry for what I did to your brother. And when I go to heaven to be judged by God, I will ask to see your brother, and I will hug him, and I will ask for his forgiveness. And Rana said, we've already forgiven you.
Wow.
Forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is freedom from hate. And our act of reaching out and forgiving Frank Roque wasn't for him, it was for us. It was so we could be liberated from the idea of a one-dimensional monster who had power over us. It was for us. But the only way that we were able to get there was that there had to be someone in the prison who was tending to the wound in Frank, helping him heal, helping him have the capacity for compassion so that he 15 years later could have that moment of reconciliation with us. But here's the thing, I just want to remind everyone, it took us 15 years to make that phone call, right? Frank had to go on his journey and we had to go on ours. We had to be grieving and raging and fighting and breathing. Enough people had to love us for us to be able to love like that.
Yes. Yes. Chris, we're coming to the end.
We are. And I'm sad for it.
Mm-hmm.
I so appreciate, and I know that so many people who are watching now or the recording thereafter so appreciate the wisdom and authenticity and the clarity that you bring to name the multiple pieces of movement work that we are all in together. If this has mattered to folks, go ahead. I'm like starting my end spiel. So if you want to add in, please do.
This was so nourishing for me. I just want to thank you both. You know, I know it's a hard time. We are all carrying heavy loads and some of us heavier than others, and we can't even be together. So for all of you who have joined in the sacred space that we've created out of nothing, for Chris and Andrea and Traci, just to be able to be in this space with you, it means so much. And I really want anyone who is feeling breathless right now, anyone who's feeling tired, anyone who has been in the labor but doesn't know how to keep going, anyone who hasn't been in the labor but wants to show up for justice, anywhere you are at, if you feel like you need a moral compass in your hands, I want to put this book into your hands as my deepest offering to you. And we're starting book clubs. So we're going to be reading together and learning together. And so it's all seenostranger.com to get the book and to be in community around it.
And all of that information is going to be available to those of you who have registered for the webinar, and it will be linked to in the YouTube down below if you are watching thereafter. And if this has mattered to you, if watching this conversation and participating along the way and you have been transformed, then you can help us continue to do things like this by supporting the UCC Annual Fund by texting UCC to 41444. And that will happen immediately.
I'm doing that right now.
And that will also be available to you in the follow-up email if you would rather do that online. I want to mention some really incredible things that are coming up on this platform and connected to it. The first is that on Thursday, which is in 2 days, we are going to be hearing from Voices, Prayers and Songs de la Frontera, about work that's happening on the border from activists and artists and pastors along the way down in the southern border. So you can witness alongside that work there. On Tuesday, we are shifting to more a practical piece for local congregations, which I have aptly titled, How Not to Add an Unintended Legal Battle to Your Church's Worries. And if you are connected and serving in local churches, that may be practical for you. And on Thursday, there's something incredible I want to let Traci tell you about. Thursday next.
On Thursday night, we are hosting a screening of the play Suppression.
Wait, I was thinking about something else. That's this weekend, right?
Yes. What are you talking about?
I'll tell you in the chat.
Oh, you can tell me out loud. We're having this conversation.
I was talking about Elizabeth.
Oh, Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren is coming to have a conversation with me on July the 9th.
Which is
That's amazing.
Thursday next.
It is amazing. It is amazing. We have a few things before that. So that's where I was. But Elizabeth Warren will be with us on July 9th, and we're going to have a conversation about how faith informs our politics. Because politics in its larger scope of meaning is just the way we show up in this world. And so the notion that one's faith can be separate from how one shows up in the world is just not true. And so as we began our march with Our Faith, Our Vote towards the election cycle, we'll be talking with Elizabeth Warren. And later we've scheduled Stacey Abrams. And we also have Congressman Barbara Lee coming. We have a long list of people who we're not interested so much in the partisanship of, but the notion that our faith informs what we do. So please join us for all of that. On July 5th, we will host a screening of the movie Suppression, which is all about voter suppression. And our DC advocacy team will join us for that screening. They're actually hosting it. And then we'll roll out for you the ways that we want you to be involved in this election cycle. I'm super excited about all of that. Now, in addition to giving to our annual fund, we have been given an opportunity to make some quick money for justice work, and I'm all for that. This coming weekend will be the release of Congressman John Lewis's long-awaited movie about his life called Good Trouble. And it premieres on Friday, and through Friday all the way to Sunday, there's a special link that has been given to the United Church of Christ. I've asked for it to be put in the chat. You should also have received it in KYP today, and it will also be on ucc.org. If you purchase your on-demand ticket to see this movie through the chat, you can watch it at your leisure on your TV all weekend long. The ticket is $12, but for every ticket you purchase, $5 will return to support the justice and witness work of the United Church of Christ. And we are so excited about this opportunity. We have so much planned for you to do. I have one last thing I want to promote, and I think there's a slide for it. I haven't seen the slides today. But if you enjoyed my friend and sister, Valarie Kaur, please put the slide back. Oh, you're trying, aren't you? If you have enjoyed listening to my friend and sister, Valarie Kaur, please know that she is going to be the speaker, the keynote speaker for the Parker Lecture this year, the 38th annual Everett C. Parker Lecture. And for those of you who do not know who Everett C. Parker is, he is a long-term justice warrior who is now an ancestor for the United Church of Christ. And his area was media justice. And so every year there is an event to support his work and to honor his name. And this year the speaker is Valerie. That event is October 15th, and it will be a virtual event. Please contact the OC Inc. at uccmediajustice.org for more information about how you can be at that gathering. Very rarely will I ask you to buy a book, but I'm asking you to buy this one. I'm asking you to buy this book and to put it into your toolkit so that we together can enact revolutionary love. I need you to understand the principles. I need you to understand the foundation. I need us to move from a place of hate versus hate to a place of incredible, overwhelming love. Not love that is meek, not love that is diminishing, but love that is so powerful that it can indeed deconstruct systems and change this world. Join me. I own 3 copies. I want you to purchase this book because I believe it is a foundational document for creating a new world. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you in the future.